Trinitarian Heresies. Before we begin to discuss some specific views of the Trinity that have been condemned by the Church as heretical, something must be said about what heresy meant in the early Church, as it took on something of a different meaning in the late Middle Ages, as well as a word about those who supported those heresies. Heresy has taken on a very negative connotation, and to even speak of heresy in today's world is often met with anger and bad memories. It is remembered that in the late Middle Ages and into the Renaissance, to be branded a heretic was to attack a person and give grounds to imprison or execute them. Heresy became something that was decided by the Church as an autonomous authority and used as a stick to beat people who disagreed with them within the institution. As such, it became an extremely political term that is rightly rejected in modern times. However, this is not the meaning that heresy had in the early Church. In the first centuries, heresy was a pastoral diagnosis. If someone was teaching something that was going to be finally destructive to the lay people, the rest of the Church, out of mercy and compassion to those who might be led astray, felt the need to combat that view. It was not nearly as political a term as it became. Heretics were not put to death, though they were occasionally exiled, and it's important to note that the mainstream of the Church was not always of one mind. In particular, the conflict with Arianism so impacted the Church that though the First Council of Nicaea in 325 AD had rejected the Arian heresy, the Church soon after became so influenced by it that it was said Athanasius, the great champion for Nicene theology at the time, against the world. Eventually the Church once again rejected Arianism, but it was not the case that once the decision was made there was no room for disagreement, but that the truth of the Trinity continued to impress itself upon the Church. Another thing that needs to be kept in mind when considering various heresies is that those who developed heretical views, the founder of a particular heresy was often called a heresiarch, often did so not in order to lead people astray or to misrepresent the truth. Instead, they were more often than not trying to do justice to the gospel as we have in Scripture. For example, the key question being asked at the time of the major Trinitarian heresies was, what is the relationship between the Father and the Son? Those who denied what would later come to be known as orthodoxy were not trying to mislead, but genuinely believed that their views were correct, and used the Bible to back these views up. This is a good place to state that throughout the history of the Church, not a single argument was solved simply by an appeal to Scripture. The questions were not based around what does the text say, but what does the text mean? A major interpretational strategy in the early Church and in the Reformation was Scripture is the best interpreter of Scripture. This meant that it was the best to allow the passages of the Bible that are clear to interpret those who are difficult. The problem is, who decides which texts are clear and which are difficult? Which texts were emphasized often made all the difference in the world. The primary concerns in theology were not truly textual but methodological. This is why the thrust of this work has been more on how we approach theology than on providing an utterly complete account of all Christian belief. With all these things in mind, we shall turn to consider some particular Trinitarian heresies and why are they destructive to the Christian faith.